Today's critique explores the largest conflicts in human history, categorizing them primarily by estimated death tolls and overall duration. And jumping right into the feedback, the methodological separation of overlapping conflicts creates statistical confusion that weakens the document's authority.
Yeah, that stood out to me right away.
Right? Let's look closely at the section discussing the deadliest conflicts, where the author lays out the dates and casualty estimates in a tabular format. Okay, so what I really like about this part is the clear visual anchor it provides right up front.
Oh, definitely. The table is super helpful.
It is. I mean, we see World War II sitting at the top of the deadliest list with, 70 to 85 million casualties.
Right.
But then, looking further down the page at rank 6, the Second Sino-Japanese War is listed as a completely separate entry with approximately 27 million casualties.
That's clearly laid out. I wonder, though, if we've considered how presenting these as completely separate, top-tier ranked entries affects the reader's understanding of the total mathematics.
Wait, you mean like how they add up?
Yeah, exactly. Because the text simultaneously acknowledges in a brief side note in the key context column that the Sino-Japanese War is a major theater of World War II.
Oh, right. They do mention that.
Yeah, but because the reader is left without clear aggregation rules, this ambiguity makes it impossible to know if those 27 million casualties are double counted within the global World War II figure.
Or if that World War II total artificially excludes the Asian theater entirely to, accommodate the separate ranking.
Precisely, you're just kind of left guessing.
I'll admit, looking at the way the table is constructed, I am genuinely getting lost in the math here.
It is a bit of a maze.
It's like corporate accounting, honestly.
Corporate accounting? How so?
Well, reporting a subsidiary's losses on both its own sheet and the parent's consolidated sheet, it creates phantom numbers.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah, the reader assumes they can just add rank 1 and rank 6 together, which immediately creates these phantom casualties that distort the entire historical record.
That analogy hits the underlying mechanical issue perfectly.
It's just bad math for the reader.
It is. And when a reader spots a wide area where the math feels, slippery or overlapping, they instinctively begin to distrust the rest of the statistics presented in the document.
Oh, for sure. Everything becomes suspect.
Right. They might start wondering if the Russian Civil War's numbers are somehow bleeding into World War I's numbers, given the overlapping timelines.
Yeah, that thought definitely crossed my mind too.
The author clearly understands the historical nuance, though. They know they separated them because the Sino-Japanese War began in 1937.
Right, prior to the traditional 1939 start of the global war.
Exactly. However, understanding the nuance in your head and actually formalizing it into a system for the reader are two very different distinct tasks.
So the suggestion here is to establish a strict, clearly defined taxonomy for aggregating or separating subconflicts to maintain statistical integrity throughout the rankings.
Yes, the document needs explicit rules of engagement for the data itself.
Absolutely.
You have to decide what constitutes a standalone event and stick to that logic relentlessly throughout the entire piece.
So if a conflict is entirely subsumed by a larger global war, the document structure needs to actually reflect that subsumption.
Yes, exactly.
Let's talk about the practical execution of that taxonomy then. I can see what you're going for here.
How would you map it out?
Well, let's see how we can strengthen this visually on the page. The most direct approach would be to nest the Second Sino-Japanese War underneath the primary World War II entry as a sub-bullet.
Oh, like visually linking them?
Yeah, perhaps indenting it and changing the numbering format from a primary integer to a subletter, like a 1A.
That makes a lot of sense.
Doing this visually demonstrates to the reader that it contributes to this 70 to 85 million total rather than competing with it.
Nesting is an incredibly elegant visual solution. It honors the sheer scale and brutality of the Asian theater, ensuring it doesn't get lost in the global statistics.
Right, while protecting the mathematical integrity of the main list.
But we should also consider the alternative.
What's the alternative?
Well, if the author's intention is to treat them as distinctly separate entries because the Sino-Japanese War began earlier, they need to add a brief methodological disclaimer at the very start of the table.
Oh, a preamble kind of thing?
Yeah. This preamble needs to explain exactly why pre-1939 conflicts are treated as standalone statistical events, explicitly stating that the World War II total on this specific table excludes the Asian theater.
Gotcha. Well, if I'm the author writing that disclaimer, I'd want to keep it incredibly brief so it doesn't bog down the introduction.
Right. Nobody wants to read a textbook just to understand a chart.
Exactly. Just a single sentence stating, for the purposes of this ranking, conflicts that originated before September 1939 are calculated independently and their casualties are excluded from the World War II total.
That works perfectly.
But frankly, going with the nesting approach feels much cleaner.
I agree.
It avoids forcing the reader to constantly refer back to a disclaimer while scrolling through the data.
I tend to lean toward the nesting approach as well, simply because it aligns better with the broad historical consensus that the average reader brings to the table.
Yeah, most people just lump it all into World War II in their heads anyway.
Exactly. If you present a World War II death toll that artificially strips out 27 million people without immediate localized context, you really risk alienating a reader who knows the total should be much higher.
Yeah, they'll just think the author made a mistake.
Right. Visual hierarchy solves the mathematical problem without requiring a dense academic footnote.
That's a great point. Okay, moving to the next major issue. Relying exclusively on absolute raw numbers obscures the true demographic devastation of older historical conflicts.
Oh, this is a big one.
It really is. I mean, comparing 20th century raw data like the 70 to 85 million deaths of World War II directly against 8th century data like the 13 million deaths of the Anlushan Rebellion, it just doesn't work.
It really doesn't.
It fails to convey the actual magnitude of the older wars when they are presented side by side in a flat list.
Building on that point, what if we looked at it from the perspective of the total human population of the era?
Oh, looking at the global population size at the time?
Yeah. 13 million people in the 8th century is a catastrophic civilization-altering loss.
Right. There were way fewer people alive.
Exactly. 13 million people in the mid-20th century, while horrifying and tragic, represents a vastly different slice of the global demographic pie.
As I understand it from the notes, the argument here is that the context shifts drastically depending on the era.
It does. Completely.
Should we be introducing a death toll inflation adjustment similar to how we adjust historical financial data so that the 30 to 60 million deaths of the Mongol Conquests carry the appropriate historical gravity for a modern reader?
That type of inflation adjustment is exactly what the document is missing.
It makes a lot of sense when you put it like that.
A modern reader sees the number 20 million and unconsciously compares it to a modern global population of 8 billion.
Right, because that's our baseline.
They like the intrinsic demographic context of the 1850s. Without that adjustment, older conflicts inevitably look smaller simply because there were fewer humans alive on the planet.
Yeah, it unintentionally diminishes the absolute apocalyptic reality of what actually occurred.
Exactly.
So the suggestion to solve this is to standardize the comparative scale by incorporating the relative percentage of the contemporary global population lost alongside the raw casualty estimates.
Yes, giving it that dual perspective.
It forces the reader to understand the data not just as a body count, but as a, demographic impact score.
He creates historical empathy through data.
Historical empathy, I like that phrase.
When you translate raw numbers into a standardized comparative scale, you allow the reader to grasp the true weight of the event.
For a concrete example, the author should add a dedicated column titled Estimated Global Population Impact.
That would fix the issue immediately.
Doing so would instantly demonstrate to the reader why the Taiping Rebellion's 20 million deaths or the Qing Dynasty conquest of Ming's 25 million deaths were fundamentally just as catastrophic to their specific historical eras as modern mechanized global wars were to ours.
Right. It levels the playing field, contextually speaking.
But here is where I have to admit I am completely lost on the mechanics.
What do you mean?
Well, if I am the author of this document, how do I actually find reliable global population data for the year 750 AD to calculate the Anlushan Rebellion's impact?
Ah, the research aspect.
Yeah, am I just making wild guesses that are going to get torn apart by historians?
That is a very real hurdle for the writer, and it requires shifting from stating hard facts to presenting historical consensus.
Okay, so leaning on the experts?
Exactly. You don't make wild guesses. You lean on established historical demographic databases, like the Madison Project database, or similar academic models that track historical population estimates.
Oh, so there are actual databases for this stuff?
Yes, thankfully. And the key is how you format the column. You don't write a hard 6.2%. You write estimated 5 to 7%.
Ah, giving a range.
By presenting a range, you acknowledge the inherent uncertainty of ancient demographics while still delivering the crucial contextual scale.
So a key theme running through this material seems to be the tension between precision and context.
Very much so.
By using those ranges, the author protects their credibility. It also retroactively strengthens the author's own passing comments.
How so?
Right now, the note in the document about the An Lushan rebellion representing a massive percentage just feels like an isolated piece of trivia.
Right, it's just kind of sitting there in the text.
But if there is a dedicated column, doing that math showing it wiped out roughly 6% of the global population compared to World War II's roughly 3%, that trivial note transforms into a foundational metric.
It bridges the gap between our modern numerical understanding and the historical reality.
Yeah, it grounds the whole claim.
It fundamentally changes how a reader processes the list. They stop looking at just the millions and start looking at the societal erasure.
Okay, let's look at the third structural point. The document promises to evaluate conflicts by geographic scope and long-term historical impact, but ultimately structures its analysis solely around casualties and duration.
Yes, the disconnect between the intro and the body is pretty glaring.
The material makes a strong case for the distinction between death tolls and historical impact by highlighting that initial contrast in the opening paragraph.
It sets up a really fascinating premise.
However, the text immediately abandons this premise. It strictly organizes the data under the headers of deadliest and longest.
Yeah.
The promised historical impact is relegated to brief passing notes in the key context column, such as mentioning World War I led to the collapse of several empires, leaving the document's initial thesis entirely unfulfilled.
Is the connection between duration and long-term impact fully established in the material, or is that an area to potentially bolster?
Honestly, I don't think it's established at all.
Because right now, the document implies that simply lasting a long time, which is what the longest wars category tracks, is a natural proxy for historical significance.
I actually have to push back heavily on the document's underlying logic there.
Go on.
Does a timeline measurement, like the 681-year duration of the Roman-Persian Wars, naturally imply impact? Or is duration without geopolitical context just an empty calendar measurement?
That is the core question, isn't it?
Right. A war can last centuries as a low-level border skirmish without fundamentally transforming the global order in the way a rapid 5-year industrial conflict might.
Oh, entirely.
Being long isn't the same as being impactful. The document assumes the reader will make the leap that duration equals significance, but it doesn't do the analytical heavy lifting to prove it.
I agree. The causality there is entirely flawed. A Cold War stretching for centuries might have far less long-term cultural impact than a short conflict that redraws the map of the world and invents entirely new technologies.
Exactly. Just counting years doesn't tell us about the legacy.
By relying on longest as a primary structural category, the document falls back into merely measuring things, counting years, instead of counting bodies, rather than analyzing outcomes.
The suggestion to fix this is to realign the document structure to deliver on the opening promise by introducing a distinct, analytical section dedicated exclusively to transformative historical outcomes.
The author needs to move beyond the spreadsheet approach and step into the historian's role, exploring the actual legacy of these events.
So getting away from just the raw data?
Right. If the opening paragraph promises an evaluation of geographic scope and long-term impact, the document must contain a structural pillar that actually conducts that evaluation.
It can't just be a side note squeezed into a narrow table column.
No, it needs its own dedicated space.
Let's look at some concrete examples for this implementation. The author needs to create a third primary category titled Most Transformative Conflicts.
That sounds like a great section to read.
Yeah, they can use this section to deeply explore how the Mongol Conquests created the largest contiguous land empire.
Right.
Or how the Reconquista's staggering 774-year duration permanently reshaped the cultural and geopolitical landscape of the Iberian Peninsula, moving beyond simply listing its start and end dates.
Exploring the actual changes it caused.
But again, from a writer's perspective, I foresee a massive pacing issue here.
How so?
If I'm tasked with writing a section on a 700-year war, how do I avoid writing a dense chronological textbook chapter that completely ruins the momentum of the document?
That is the exact trap authors fall into in trying to prove historical significance. The solution is to completely abandon chronological narrative in this new section.
Wait, just abandon the timeline entirely?
Yeah, you don't write a timeline of the Reconquista. You write an analytical summary focused purely on institutional legacy.
Okay, I'm following you.
You dedicate one paragraph to how the constant border friction created a highly militarized society.
Right.
You dedicate the next paragraph to how that specific societal structure funded the voyages of exploration, altering global history in 1492.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
You focus on the inflection points and the structural changes, ignoring the blow-by-blow military history entirely.
That framing is perfect, actually. Under most transformative conflicts, you aren't just saying the Mongol Conquests killed 30 to 60 million people.
Right, because we already covered that in the deadliest section.
Exactly. You use this new space to explore how that massive demographic shift facilitated the Silk Road trade, altered the genetic makeup of continents, and reset the balance of power in Eastern Europe and Asia.
Yes.
You are finally answering the so what of the document's opening hook, and you are doing it through thematic analysis rather than timeline reporting.
It fundamentally shifts the reader's relationship with the material. They go from passively consuming a top 10 list to actively engaging with cause and effect.
It's just a much richer reading experience.
When you frame it as a transformative outcome, the duration or the casualty count becomes a mechanism for change, not just a trivia fact to be ranked. It fulfills the intellectual contract the author signed in the very first sentence of the piece.
To summarize, the key takeaways to elevate this material are clarify the aggregation methodology to eliminate statistical double counting between major wars and their regional theaters.
Super important for maintaining trust with the reader.
Absolutely. Next, integrate a population percentage metric using established historical ranges to accurately contextualize historical casualties against their eras.
That demographic impact score we talked about.
Right. And finally, add a dedicated thematic section analyzing the long-term geographic and historical impacts to fulfill the document's opening promise.
Delivering on premise.
We invite you to implement these structural changes and submit the revised document back to us for a future critique.